that there's a couple of minutes where we log in and people are coming, but you'll be able to see this live stream. And welcome to another episode, right? of
Yes, we're so excited. Another episode where Daisy and I discuss something around our work and what's happening with the different generations, whether you're a Gen Z, a millennial, a Gen X, or a boomer. But today it's just a Gen X and a Gen Z. And we're excited to be talking about silent quitting. I'm going to start our Instagram feed too, but oh no, it looks doesn't look very good, but I'm going to test and see what's going on. Okay. All right. Well, listen, for everybody who's just joining now, we're talking about silent quitting, which is another one of those buzzwords. Stacey and I were just talking about it. And today we're going to, talk a little bit about, how do you spot, as a boss, as a coworker, somebody who's silent quit. Well, first of all, what is it? And I want Daisy to give us that. But how do you spot when that's happening? My first thought was like, well, why don't you just quit loudly and not quietly? Like what's the difference there? I think I've always quit loudly. No, no, that's not true. We were talking. There's a few instances where we both done quiet and loud, Daisy and I, and we'll talk about those differences. But what can you do as a company to prevent it? Or maybe there's nothing to do once an employee has made up their mind, or a boss. I've been a CEO in another company where I'm like, I'm so miserable. Just put me out of my misery. And, you try to quit and you can't. So it's really is at every level, but maybe the buzzword of silent quitting is a new thing. It's a more Gen Z thing.
yeah.
Um, right, so let's just go for it, Daisy, because we only have a half an hour. If
Right.
anybody watching has questions, please put them on the chat and we'd be super happy to answer them. If we know if we know the answer, probably Daisy will know the answer more than me. But let's just start with, what is silent quitting, Daisy? Because when I asked you about it, you're like, oh yeah, that's real, I know all about it. So give us the tea on that.
Okay, so um, quiet quitting, it's really, I think it's a term that is new, but I have a feeling that it's something that it's across generations. It's basically this idea that when you're employed, when you're at a job, you if you don't feel like you fit, if you don't feel like this is a good place and you're ready to move on to the next opportunity or the next thing, you just silently start to clock out in your mind. So you'll do the bare minimum just enough so that you can still stay in the job while necessary or with the time necessary before you leave. Or it can be something like burnout, where you're considering the idea of quitting, or you're considering the idea of not being there anymore for various reasons. And instead of causing a commotion and being like, I'm putting my 2 weeks in and living out whatever that 2 weeks is going to look like for you, you just sit back down in it, and you just do the bare minimum, and you're there, but you're not going above and beyond.
Right. You said something regarding burnout. So I would say, like, if you spot somebody, because I think it's clear, right? People who are pretty engaged and excited about what they do, and then some others where you're like, you can really see the burnout.
Yes.
And if that employee or colleague or even boss, right? Because like we said, it's at every level. You see that, like, what would your recommendation be for somebody that you value, that you like? Obviously, have a conversation and maybe suggest a break to see if it's really burnout, or if it's really there's no more passion in my work, no matter how many vacations I might take.
Yeah,
When it's happened to you, what would have been helpful for you to reframe that? Or was there no going back
I
once
think
you
for some positions, I could have had a comeback of I would have reconsidered staying. And I'm going to be so real. I think this is just as simple as it is. It should just be a conversation. It should
Mhm.
just be a conversation. You can simply, I think an employer, in order to spot whether this is burnout, whether this is something that's mendable, just set up a time where you have coffee, breakfast, you just speak with your employee, you just have a normal conversation, chime in to where their mind is. And I think for a lot of us like a lot of us employees, all we want to know is that we are taken into consideration,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
Sometimes that's literally what will save someone from completely wanting to quit. But unfortunately, there are, companies out there that don't put that much priority to their employees. They really
Hmm.
don't put that much priority, that much time. They have, other um, positions that maybe they care more about. Who knows? But I think that's one way that could definitely mend. And you can chime into what's going on. Is this person about to quit? Is this person still interested in their role? Ask them questions. Do they like the people that they work with? How do they feel there so far? Do they feel like they've been growing? Is there something that they would like to do other than this, right?
Right.
I think those are important questions.
Those important. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe also another recommendation is to not wait that it gets to that point, right? Like I know at other companies we would do like, a day a week where we would give people like Starbucks cards and you could pick somebody from your team, but this could be, with maybe your boss or something where you're like once every 2 weeks, once every month, once every week, if you have the time, just have a check-in, right? Like, how
Yeah.
are you doing? How are you feeling? Like, we're also consumed with the ROI and the metrics and the reporting to the board and to that sometimes we just don't make the time. But I would say for somebody that's incredibly, I mean, you're only going to be as good as the team that you have, as the team that you're have the privilege to maybe lead. And if that's important, then I think before it gets to a point of no return, that you're constantly taking that temperature might be a better way than to wait, right? If obviously if it's somebody who's very critical, I think as the other way around would be somebody who you're like, this is not a good fit for a company. This is not somebody who's a top performer. This is not somebody who we see in the future. But you also don't fire them because it's like, all right, better somebody than not. But I think that's felt. You and I were having that conversation. That's almost as bad because you're like silent firing them, right? You're just not giving them enough responsibility, not giving them any praise, not giving them any guidance, no mentorship, and they're going to feel that it's like their time's limited there. So it's very unproductive, I think, for both sides to be
Um,
that. To me, it's like rip off the band-aid. If it's not working out for you or for them, just be honest.
yeah, I mean, and as easy as that sounds, to be honest, it's not as
No,
put into practice as we would like to see it in the ideal world.
no.
It's kind of, I mean, and then you mentioned, yeah, quiet firing. That is something that I've experienced, right? And I think after having those experiences, after just experiencing in the past such, wrong fits, maybe workplaces that were very detrimental to my mental health, um, I'm deciding to do the opposite, to be loud about it. I think as a young professional, this is something that truly signals confidence and truly signals, growth, is being able to be confident, loud, honest, and communicative about what your plans are, where you're thinking, like, what I don't like. I think like, if anything, it's the same thing. Like, as much as I want my employers to be honest to me, it's a good rule to be honest back, right?
Yeah, I think the whole silent thing, whether it's silent quitting or silent firing, is because both sides know that's not going to be a permanent good fit. And
Mhm.
everybody's waiting for the better opportunity to come in. So if you're silent quitting, you're like, oh, I'll stay here, do the bare minimum until I find something else. On the other side, on the silent firing, is okay, we're eventually going to fire this person, but while we find somebody, we'll just tolerate that they're here. And that just creates a really toxic environment, I
Oh
think.
my goodness. I'm not gonna say the name of the company because,
Please don't, please don't.
but I'm gonna give you an experience that I had where I had first experienced silent firing. I had gone into this company to, and this is why it matters, because when you sign on to a role, it's important for a company or an employer to know what are they signing on, and is this going to work for us long term. So I had signed on with a company as a part-time administrative assistant, right? I was still in college, still finishing, and they were like, okay, this works for us. um, and while I was at the job, they would push on this idea of, are you able to come more hours, are you able to come in more times? And unfortunately, I couldn't. I was a college student, so I had to manage time. And one time I'm at the front desk and I get a phone call and I'm like, "Hi, thanks for calling, blah blah blah. How may I help you?" And they say, "Yeah, I'm calling. I have an interview today for the administrative assistant position at 2 p.m." And I'm like, "One second."
Oh,
And I think about it and I'm like, "Wait, I'm the only administrative assistant here. What? Like am I getting replaced? Like is this it?" And over time, like within that same week, within a couple days, there was a lot of little scuffles going on about, time and this. Don't worry about it. We'll give you the assignment. Never mind. All this that I asked, am I getting replaced? And they said, sit down. We have to have a conversation. And that's when I realized that was so unfair. It's so unfair to just go
right.
behind. Why couldn't I just been told from the get go? Like,
Yeah, we're gonna need somebody that has the time or
yeah,
whatever, but they
yeah,
just said, okay, meanwhile, we'll just do it.
yeah, yeah. So I was like, oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and I'm sure after you learned that, you weren't at your best because you're already like, "Oh, well, so
Yeah,
if I'm gonna be fired, definitely I'm not gonna do more than I need to. I
yeah,
should start looking for something else." So your focus is somewhere else.
yeah,
It makes a lot of sense, you know? And so that was like a silent firing sort of situation. But have you ever had that you've done your own sort of silent quitting?
yeah,
Without mentioning any companies, but how did that happen? Like,
yeah,
was it a bad fit from the beginning? Was it burnout? Was it like
yeah.
how did you get to that place? I,
Like,
I've done it too
and
now that I reflect on it, but I'll
yeah,
tell you my
and I've
story after yours.
yeah, and I've told you, in this company, Suma, that you're seeing the best of me. But I promise you, my very early career, very early opportunities, I did not do my best, right? And I'm ashamed to say it, but yes, I've definitely quiet quit or silent quit. And this was for just a company that I felt the role was, it just wasn't for me,
Mm.
and I won't say what it is because then it's gonna be too tell. Like, you go to my
People could guess.
people can guess. I'll go to my profile and they'll be like, "Oh, it's this one." Um, but the role just felt like from the very beginning, I didn't get good training. I didn't get enough training 3 months in. I'm still not confident in the methodology of this, role. I'm still feeling like, I'm not really sure. I liked the benefits, I liked the hours, I liked the other things, but just the position itself felt like I wasn't it wasn't going to be for me. And so, at that time, they were pushing on like, do more, do more. Like my KPIs were already here and I'm barely like meeting them, but they're like, do more, do more. And I'm like, there's no way. There is just no way. I'm going to try to find the next opportunity as I'm finishing, this one. So I just started, interviewing. And by the time I got an interview and I got in and I got another position, I was still in this one. And I said, just that next day, I said, "Hey, I'm not gonna do, this job anymore." And they were so excited to just work with me and continue to work with me and try to get me to, help them out and raise their KPIs and all this. But I was like, I can't. This too much.
Yeah.
It's too much for me. Yeah.
But I think that, like we talked earlier, that could have been avoided maybe by them having the insight of like check in,
Yes.
see how you're doing. Maybe also on you to say, hey, I don't feel like I've been trained properly for this.
Yes.
But you're also a very young employee, you can't expect that somebody who's in college, out of college recently is gonna have sort of that playbook to be like, okay, like I need to raise my hand and ask for this, particularly if you also knew that wasn't the right role for you. I think that, I mean, there's something there, right? Because before we started live, you and I were talking about places that are just, even if your boss is amazing, even if everything on paper sounds great, if it's not great for you, it'll never be great, right? Like I remember I used to work at this travel agency I don't think anybody's gonna Google it because it's not in my resume, so nobody will know. But I got this summer job at a travel agency in San Diego. I used to work in, like, I was border girl, so between Tijuana and San Diego. So the job I loved was my radio show. And I would do that every afternoon after school, whatever. But it paid me $20 a week. Like ridiculous. Okay. Even if this is 40 years ago, it's still nothing. And then this other job in San Diego paid me $800 a week, right? So I was like, oh, no brainer.
Yeah.
During the summer, I'm going to do this job to buy myself a car, whatever. I was so stressed and miserable because it was like all these people that would fly to Cabo, and like their hotel was wrong and their flights delayed and the people didn't pick them up at the airport, and they would call screaming at you. And I was just beyond stressed. It wasn't even 15 minutes that I in the job that I would have a migraine every single day. Like, and I was like, it was a lot of money if you think about it. I was like, if I stick this out for the summer, I can definitely get my car. But I just couldn't take it. I mean, I was like, I have to quit. I mean, I finished the summer, I think, bought my car, but I was like, never in my life will I take a job that I'm miserable in, because it wasn't the fault of the people there. They checked in with me. They were nice. But I just wasn't inspired. So I think another lesson is, and I say this to my daughter a lot, who's, in college, and she's like, I'll take any job. I'll do anything. And I'm like, but it would be better if you do something that you really like. No, it doesn't matter if I like it. I need to put in my resume. I need to get the experience. I'm like, no, it does matter if you like it, because being miserable means you're not going to be at your best. And I do think that's a conversation that might be nothing wrong with the workplace or the work environment or your boss. But if you're still not inspired and it's not what you want, I just think it's going to be really hard to stick it out and to be at your best.
Now, I know now you're a CEO, you have multiple businesses, you hire multiple people. If you were to go back, like knowing this information about how somebody could quit or somebody could, feel this way about the job, what would you do now to try to prevent just a big mess from happening? Like, would you understand like what the role actually is and tell people straight up like, hey, a lot of people have quit? Like, would you relay that type of information? Would you hold back on certain, like, what would you do now?
No, I would definitely. I mean, I'm learning a lot just from our conversations, because I'm like, somebody that I really value in the company. I'm like, I got to do more check-ins, right? I got to make sure how are people feeling? Are we burning them out? Like, how could we support them? Is this really the role they want to do? Is there something else that they can do in the company that might be more inspiring to them if this is not the right role? Especially because talent is very hard to find, and you're only as good as the team that you surround yourself with. So for me, I would definitely, but I would also be very, very honest. And we are honest. We say, listen, we're a startup, right? Like 9 to 5 is really hard at a startup. Yet we want to honor the rest and reset. We want to honor the weekends. But we are also honest in saying sometimes it'll go beyond 5 o'clock. Sometimes there might be a weekend, right? When we did our activation at Texas A&M, we worked the entire weekend. I mean, because it happened to be on a Saturday and we couldn't say no. So yeah, I try to be honest. So somebody who's like, listen, that for me does not work, then you need that honesty from the beginning, I think, right? And also I think, as somebody, looking for the very best talent, to really take into consideration not only what the company needs, but what that person needs as well. Like, what is going to make you happy? What is going to make you be inspired? And how could we support you? Is there a way that we can support you in that growth? Yes or no. And if it's no, you have to be honest. I think that's just a way to avoid misery for
I
somebody working for
I
you,
think
because
I will encourage people. I think the next rage, and sometimes, us Gen Z, we take on certain trends almost to retaliate on systems that we're experiencing right now. If you were to tell me if you were to ask me when I'm gonna buy a house, I will laugh because I don't know. That sounds impossible to me, right? Compared to how, maybe way back when a minimum wage job you could afford a house. But
right.
this sometimes we take on trends to be like, you know this is us coming back from corporate, like we're taking our power back. I would say, I think the next move to take your power back is to be loud, is to be bold, is to be confident, is to say what you really want to say, of course, in a professional way. Let's be
Mhm.
but to just open up about it, because you never know what that may bring you. I think that even brings more opportunities, because you keep your integrity, you're honest with yourself, you're honest with other people, and that may even um you know avoid burning bridges in the long term, because one of the things that can come out of quiet quitting is maybe an employer could have a really bad now reputation of you, or like a really bad impression of you. And unfortunately, if you are someone that wants to stay in the same industry, whether it's beauty, tech, fashion, any engineering, like construction, if you want to stay in an industry, people know each other from those
Mhm.
industries, and they may give you a review. Maybe you're interviewing, you know, with someone, and they ask, "Hey, what do you know about this person?" They may not say the best things about you if you're constantly in this cycle of quiet quitting, not telling people how you really feel, just doing the bare minimum. It can really be a detriment to you and your your incredible talent.
Absolutely. I think that, the one of the many lessons here, particular for Gen Z, but for everybody really is, there's no need to burn bridges. Like you can still quit and you can be very decent about it, right? You could say, this is not the right fit. This is not what I thought. I appreciate the opportunity. And then you move on. But I do think that's a skill that we need to teach younger, middle, older generations. But not burning bridges is very, very important. I mean, listen, my husband had an assistant many years ago that I met when we were dating. And I'm going to say maybe 20 years later, we went into this network and we had to pitch a team of people a new show when I used to produce TV. And the assistant was the executive taking the pitch. She wasn't an assistant anymore,
Mm,
right? She was the EVP of the network 20, 25 years later. And right, so it's not just that you as a young person need to not burn bridges.
yeah.
You as the boss need to not burn bridges either, right?
Yeah.
Because we always tend to think like, oh, it's one way. Oh yeah, you're young, don't burn the bridges. Because in this case, he was the boss, he had the assistant, and now it was her decision to buy our show or not 20, 25 years
Oh,
later.
wow.
It goes both ways. She did buy the show, so that's great. I'm like, thank God you were a good boss.
Yeah. No,
But
seriously,
it's
yeah,
true. It's true.
it's
You
true.
only have your reputation, and that we all should take not lightly, but both ways, right? You
Yeah.
should always be the best version of a human that you can in
Yeah.
general, because why not? But it definitely goes both ways. It's not just for the youth, right? It's
I
not just
agree. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Things can turn around, and with time, with enough time, enough patience, people, start growing, and it
absolutely.
can happen.
So
To any employers who have had me, I have not had the best person. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm a better person, but but yeah.
no, but listen, I think that whether we used to call it silent quitting or burnout or I'm just so done with what I'm doing, I think we've all been there. And if you don't have an immediate boss or superior that can spot that early on, or that doesn't give you the time to check in, at least, I think it's on us to have to say, this is how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
If you really want to stay, like, I need more of you on whatever it is, the training, the time that you can give me to brainstorm on what I could do better, whatever it might be. I mean, and you never outgrow that, right? Like, for me as CEO, I report to our board, and I always send my board meetings asking, like, what feedback do you have for me? How
Mhm.
can I do my job better? Like, none of us are like, you think like, oh, but who do you report to? I report to a board, and I have that responsibility. And there's always, we can all do better for sure. And there's always like, hey, can you give me a little bit more time to give me feedback or to tell me how I could be a better leader or how I could be managing this situation in a better way. But I do think that with younger generations, that is a skill, to your point, of being more vocal, less quiet and louder. I agree with you, right? I always say, like, calladitas no more, with that saying of calladita te ves más bonita that we have in our Latino community, of when you're quiet you look prettier, that we grew up and our grandmas and moms would always be like, ay mijita, calladita te ves más. I'm like, oh my god, I hate that so much.
To
And I'm just like, no, no, like, speak up, be loud.
speak
I
up.
think that doesn't get old. And I'm excited to hear you say that you think younger Gen Zs are definitely louder. I think that some Gen Zs that I have very close to me in my life want to be incredibly accommodating, and maybe that's just the ones I know. And I'm just like, speak up. It's like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get paid for all the work I did last year, because I'm like, why wouldn't you say, oh, I'm sorry, like, this is not in my, no, 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 I don't want to do that. I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. I mean, I think, let me just send a text. I'm like, have a conversation, have a human conversation, to your point. If you can grab a coffee, if you can go for a walk, if you can, that connection is so important for any generation. We are always learning as older generations, and younger generations can also learn. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, there's a lot of soft skills to learn to be able to, be able to speak up about your workplace stuff. But what kind of takeaways should we do you think we should give employers? Yeah.
Yeah, I think employers, employees, I think we can wrap it up with, check in constantly. If your boss is not one to make the time, maybe you can suggest it, right? Like, hey, I'd love to have a monthly check-in to see how I'm doing, what else could I be doing better, how I'm feeling. Maybe you have suggestions. Like, I think being proactive, if you are in a position of sort of, you have a team of people under you, do those check-ins. And I do think that one-on-ones are always better. It's great to have all hands, but it's never the same, right? So at least schedule it so it doesn't get lost in the madness. Both ways, whoever starts it, doesn't matter, but I think those conversations are very important. I think what we just said, which is what you said, literally, don't be quiet, be loud, like, really come into your power and your voice and really express how you're feeling. Don't always think that being accommodating is the best version of yourself, because if I don't know how you're feeling, it's going to be hard for me to support you, right? And then at the end, people are blindsided, either you knowing that they're looking for another executive assistant, or somebody like me, by somebody saying, I'm burned out, I'm done. And I'm like, what? How did that happen? How did I never figure this out when you're so critical and important to the company? What else would you think? I think those are super important.
I think having a self evaluation for an employee, like someone who's working, having a self evaluation and seeing, how do I feel right now? Is there something else that I want out of this role? Am I okay with this role for the next year? Sometimes it's hard for us to see our future and to
Right.
decide on 30 years down the line, 20 years. But what about the next 6 months? What about the next year? Possibly do a self check in and see if your current job, your current position is going to allow you to be where you want to be in 6 months or in a year. And if completely not, then you know that it's time to have a conversation about it, right? Once you've already put the everything together. um yeah, self evaluation, self check-ins, and of course, I think always putting your best foot forward. Maybe you don't maybe you don't have the energy because you're burnt out to go above and beyond, but definitely to still provide a good, for people to still say you did, for you to be happy that you said you did the best you can, because at the end of the day, the world is smaller than we think, and all of these things matter for long-term consistency, to be a really good person, to be, really good employee, and to build a good record with, your work ethic.
Absolutely. I think that's so critical. Well, I think we covered in what we talked about, a few of the questions that we have here, like how do you communicate with supervisors, how do you become a little bit more confident, or like, listen, it's all trial and error and practice, right? Practice. Sometimes it might be scary to tell your boss, listen, I'd love to maybe have a coffee or have a conversation. I do think that conversations outside of the office, if they can swing it for you, are really good. Whether it's take a walk around the block and have it, it's very different than when you have to sit in front of your boss's like chair. And maybe a lot of us work remotely, so it might need to be Zoom.
Yes.
But if you can have that human connection, like we said before, I think that starts upping your confidence. And I'm sure the first ones you'll have a stomach ache, and we've all had it, and that's okay. But the more you do it, I think the better you get at it, at just saying, this is how I'm feeling. And I'd love your take on whatever it is that issue is. I think that is super, super critical. But I really appreciate your insights, Daisy, as always. This is great. I've learned a lot from you, as always. And yeah, I mean, for everybody who values human capital, which we should all do, I think these conversations might be hard, but they're definitely super, super important. So